All right, chapter 227, Coldbath Fields Prison. Return we now to the Resurrection Man, that incarnate fiend whose crimes were so numerous and all of so black a dye. Yeah, I've been wondering what happened with him. I have a feeling that even though he's been arrested, we have not seen the last of him. Firmly bound and guarded by 3 officers who kept their bludgeons in their hands, the miscreant saw that all resistance was vain. He accordingly threw himself back in the cab that was bearing him to prison, and gave way to his saturnine reflections. If I had only thought that Richard Markham would have accompanied that young girl, Catherine, it was thus he mused. A very different song would have been sung, but I knew that he was married only a week ago, and never dreamt that he would leave his pretty wife to poke his nose into Banks's crib. What an infernal oversight on my part. And now here I am, regularly lumbered, and all the swag arising from Kate Wilmot's business is in the hands of that canting sneak Banks. I shall swing for this if I don't take precious good care. He'll swear to 2 different attempts on his life, one at the old house near Birdcage Walk, the other at Twig Folly. What a 10 times cursed fool I was to let myself stumble into a snare in this way. Someone else will find the gold that I have saved up, and when I shall be cold and stiff under the pavement of Newgate, others will riot on my treasure. But no, it can't happen in that way. It's impossible that my time has come yet. Impossible. I shall escape somehow or another. I must escape. I will escape. But how? That question is the devil of the difficulty. Never mind, escape I will, so I mustn't be downhearted. These and numberless other reflections, in which despondency and hope alternately asserted a predominant influence, occupied the mind of Anthony Tidkins, as the cab proceeded rapidly through Bethnal Green and Shoreditch, then along Old Street, up the Goswell Road, through Northampton Square, and lastly along Exmouth Street in its way to Coldbath Fields Prison. At length the cab turned into the short road which forms the approach within the wooden railings in front of the governor's dwelling, to the great gates of the jail, those gates over which may be read in large letters, Middlesex House of Correction. A shudder crept over even the iron frame of Anthony Tidkins as those huge portals, towering high above the cab which now drew up close to them, seemed to frown upon him like a colossal genius of evil amidst the obscurity of night. Benstead leapt from the cab and knocked loudly at the gate. The iron din was responded to by gloomy echoes from the courts inside. In a few minutes, heavy chains fell, and the wicket was opened by a man bearing a lantern. Benstead whispered to him for a few moments, and Tidkins was conducted into a little lobby on the left hand. The turnkey, who had opened the gate, then proceeded to the governor's house, which was close by within the walls, and after an absence of 10 minutes, he returned with an affirmative answer to Benstead's request that the prisoner might be retained in custody in that jail until a magistrate should otherwise dispose of him. The turnkey accordingly led the way through the wicket of a strong iron grating across a yard where a watchman armed with a loaded blunderbuss was stationed, and thence into a building, up the narrow stone staircase of which the party proceeded, until they reached a cell where the Resurrection Man, who was now released from his bonds, was left. Tidkins threw himself upon the bed and soon fell asleep. He was not an individual to whom danger, or even the prospect of death, could bring remorse. Darkness and solitude had no alarms for him, and thus, in spite of the profound vexation he experienced at his present predicament, he yielded to the influence of fatigue and slept soundly. On the following morning, a bowl of gruel and a piece of bread were supplied for his breakfast, and he washed at the common sink belonging to that department at the jail. At 10 o'clock, Benstead and 2 other officers arrived, placed manacles upon him, and conveyed him to a cab, in which they seated themselves with him. In about half an hour, the Resurrection Man was placed in the dock at the Lambeth Street police office. The Prince of Montoni, attended by his solicitor, Mr. Dyson, had entered the court a few moments before, and the magistrate, upon being made acquainted with his name and rank, immediately threw down the newspaper, saying, "It is by no means necessary that your highness should enter the witness box. Your highness will do me the honor to accept a seat on the bench, and the clerk will take down your highness's evidence at your highness's leisure. Make room there for his highness. Usher, clear the way for his highness." And Richard is probably like, oh my gosh. Scarcely able to conceal his disgust at this fulsome behavior of the magistrate, the prince coldly said, "I thank you, sir, for your politeness, but I cannot consent to receive a favor which would not be shown to a poor and obscure individual." The magistrate turned very red and bowed meekly, but without repeating his offer. The case was then entered upon. The prince detailed the particulars of that adventure at the Resurrection Man's house in the neighborhood of the Birdcage Walk, with which the reader is already acquainted, and he also related the subsequent circumstances connected with the blowing up of the den, a deed which had cost several persons their lives, and which, added Markham, was no doubt perpetrated by Tidkins himself. When these depositions were taken down, the prince was about to enter upon his second charge, namely the attack made upon him at Twig Folly. But the magistrate thought the first case had better be previously completed and resolved upon remanding the prisoner for 3 days, in order to allow time to procure the evidence of those surviving policemen who had witnessed the fate of their brother officers on the occasion of the blowing up of the house. Tidkins was accordingly remanded to Coldbath Fields Prison, and the Prince of Montoni immediately repaired in his carriage to Holmesford House, the particulars of which visit have been detailed in the preceding chapter. On his return to the jail, Tidkins was allowed to walk for an hour in the treadwheel yard nearest to the entrance of the prison. There are several treadmill yards in Coldbath Fields Jail, alike for males and females, but we specify the particular yard in which the Resurrection Man was permitted to take exercise, but because it has relation to a certain event which is to follow. Interesting. It is also of the wheel in this yard that the fan or balance is seen above the wall near the southwestern angle of the prison by persons passing through the Coldbath Square. The treadwheel is an enormous drum or cylinder with ranges of steps all around it, at a distance of about 1.5 feet from each other. Between 40 and 50 persons could work on the wheel at one time. It moves slowly round toward the prisoners placed upon it, and thus the step on which the foot stands descends while the next step presents itself. A platform is built to half the height of the wheel, and from this platform the prisoners step upon the wheel itself. They support themselves by a railing, and their weight keeps the wheel in motion. Thus they must sink with all their weight as they work on that rotary engine of diabolical torture. The action is that of going upstairs without, however, actually rising higher, for every step so reached sinks beneath the feet, and the prisoner is compelled to get upon the next one in its descent. Those prisoners who wait their turns to go on sit upon the platform, and the taskmaster in the yard directs the intervals of labor and those of rest. And upon this engine of torture, as we ere now denominated the treadmill, not only boys of 12 years of age are placed, but even women. Yes, in this civilized country, in this land where novelists and poets celebrate the chivalrous devotion which should be paid to the softer sex, in this great city where the pseudo-saints blurt forth their nauseating hypocrisy at Exeter Hall, and swindle the charitable of alms for the purpose of improving the condition of people thousands of miles away, while there is such an awful want of instruction and moralizing element at home, in the very center of the English capital are women subjected to the ferocious torture of the treadmill. The food is scanty, and yet the labor thus forced upon the poor, sickly, half-starved wretches is horribly severe. 3/4 of the crimes which send prisoners to Coldbath Fields are larcenies and robberies caused by dire penury and pinching want. The miserable beings are half famished already when they enter the jail, but they are nevertheless retained in something closely bordering on that state of constant hunger, while the hardest possible labor is required of them. Remember, reader, that we do not wish idleness to prevail in a prison. It is just the place where habits of industry should be inculcated. We therefore approve of the system of workshops established in Coldbath Fields. We admire the oakum room, the room, too, where shoemaking is taught, and that department of the prison in which rugs are manufactured for a wholesale warehouse that contracts for the purchase of the same. But we abhor torture. We detest cruelty, and the treadwheel is alike a torture and a cruelty. It makes the heart bleed in the breast of the visitor to the female division of Coldbath Fields to behold women nursing their babes at one moment, and then compelled to deliver their sucklings to the care of their fellow prisoners, while they themselves repair to take their turn upon the treadmill. Talk of the despotism of other places. Talk of the tyranny of those countries where the will of one man is law, be it for good or evil. We solemnly, emphatically cry, look at home. Flogging in the army and navy, private whipping in prisons, semi-starvation in workhouses and jails, and the treadwheel. These are the tortures which exist in the land of boasted civilization. These are the instances in which our rulers seek to emulate the awfulness of past ages and the wanton inhumanity of autocrats. We must in justice observe the Coldbath Fields prison is kept in a most cleanly state. Perhaps the ventilation is not as perfect as it might be, and certainly the stone cells must be awfully cold in winter, for there is no means of imparting to them any artificial warmth. But as far as wholesome cleanliness is concerned, there is not the slightest ground whereon to raise a cavil against the establishment. The discipline maintained in that jail is on the silent system. No separation, no classification during the day. Oh, there is. There is no separation, no classification during the day. But the plan of silence prevents the corruption of the only moderately bad by the inveterate wicked. At night, each individual sleeps apart in a cell. Anthony Tidkins walked about the yard, affecting a moody and sullen air of indifference, but in reality catching with rapid glance every point of the buildings around him, every object within the range of his vision, so that he committed to memory a complete map of that division of the prison where he was now taking exercise. Having walked an hour, he was reconducted to his room, where a bowl of pease soup and a slice of bread was given to him for dinner. In the evening, he was supplied with a basin of gruel and another piece of bread, and was then locked in for the night. Okay, that's the end of the chapter. So Richard set forth his charges against the Resurrection Man. They're going to go gather the evidence. They've got 3 days, and then there'll be another trial to determine if he's guilty. And the Resurrection Man has been taken back to the prison, the jail where he's being held. The authors took a minute to explain some of the conditions there, because the Penny Dreadfuls generally not only were, tales of adventure and crime and romance and all of that, but it wasn't unusual for them to take a moment to make some social commentary. But the Resurrection Man clearly is figuring out a way to escape, and I suspect he's going to manage it. All right, we'll see.